Okay. I'm Jasmine Skee, so I'm going to be hosting today's panel. I just want to reflect on the last panel, so thank you, Tracy, and everyone that did that. But if you haven't, I also want to say, if you haven't been to Saudi and seen that region, I would highly encourage everyone to go over there. I was previously CEO of Guild Esports, and we participated in the Esports World Cup. And on my first trip, I was kind of summonsed out there. And I think I've been 7 times since and was part of WiMENA in February. And it is such an incredible country. And I think what makes it so beautiful is the people. So I would really encourage everyone, if they can, to go out there. And if the misconceptions that we do here, especially in the UK, I think you'll really see a different country. And then I think the second thing I just wanted to say as well was just in a previous job, I actually negotiated the Chelsea deal for 3. And a big part of us doing that deal was actually the women's team. And when I came in to negotiate that deal, that whole wall was full of men, the footballers. And coming in today and seeing so many women on that board is just the opportunity, I think, when brands do come into this space and really do support women. It goes beyond eyeballs on media. You actually get to change sport. So I would just really encourage everyone here who is a brand and can influence women in sport to do that. But what I'm going to do is hand it over to the panel so they can do introductions, and then we'll get started.
Hello, everyone. My name is Rebecca Hopkins. I'm the CEO of the STA Group. We own entities like the Sports Technology Awards, Sports Tech Annual Review. I've worked in sport for about 25 years now. And in that time, I think the biggest evolution I've seen, when I first entered sport, I wouldn't even hope to look at a room and think there was anywhere near parity of gender in the room. Often, one was the loneliest number. So it's lovely to be here today, really excited about the topic, and delighted to be talking to so many peers who are female.
Thanks so much for the really kind invite to be here today. I'm Professor Jo Maher, and I'm the Pro-Vice Chancellor for Sport at Loughborough University. We look after sport as a global world #1 research ranking. We have a Women in Sport Research and Innovation Hub that we've just launched, supported kindly by colleagues here at DCMS and Minister Stephanie Peacock. And we are trying to change the game in terms of research and innovation across over 50 academics to help improve sport for everybody.
Yes, good morning, everybody. My name is Manfred Lerley. I'm the founder and CEO of iBall. iBall is a community platform for youth elite football players. We were founded 5 years ago, and we are based on 2 basic principles. One is we believe that talent in football is everywhere, and secondly, we believe that visibility creates a lot of opportunities in the football space. So that's why we created a platform where today basically more than 1,000 football clubs are participating. We have more than 260,000 player profiles on the platform, and we are reaching out in over 30 countries, over 3 continents.
Hi everyone, I'm Erin Bourke, and I'm the lead of the FIA's United Against Online Abuse in Sport Coalition. We are an organisation of 68 members now across the globe and across sport. Founded just 2 years ago, our ethos really is to be research-led, committed to action and stronger together. And what we aim to do is break down the sort of silo approach of working, sometimes in the industry, and bring people together so we can ensure a cross-collaborative approach to combating online harms.
Hello everyone, another Bourke here at the end of the panel. My name is Jacqueline Bourke. I'm Senior Director of the Creative Department at Getty Images and iStock. We're very passionate about understanding how can we not only close the visibility gap around the representation of women and girls in sport, but also how do we bring greater intentionality and collaboration to do that. So to that end, I head up our insights team, our content creation team, and our curation, promotion, and merchandising teams, so that we ensure that we are, 1, bringing data-backed insights that can really connect with today's fan base. Number 2, that we're creating the right kinds of content and working with our customers. And number 3, that we are taking our responsibility seriously on our platforms to curate, promote, and merchandise around it.
Thank you. I think this is only going to be a topic that's going to continue to grow and grow. I think the investment in sports tech at the moment is about 15 billion, and it's going to be reported to be 105 billion by 2033. So I think there's so much opportunity, especially when it comes to women as in sport and tech. So I want to open this up to the panel. I mean, what do we think is the biggest breakthrough when it comes to tech and changing women's sport over the last couple of years? Who wants to take that?
Where shall I start? I think probably from what we've seen is that it's got to be broadcast. I mean, it's been said a couple of times already, and I'm doubtless it will be said again, but just from the point of view of you become what you can see, by just creating that airtime, whether it's through traditional broadcast channels or streaming, and there's a whole raft of technology that's made it so much more accessible for sports and teams of all sizes. It's just meant that it's been possible. So for my money, that's probably the single biggest thing. There's a lot more, but if we're asking it after the GOAT, that would be it from me.
Yeah, I think from a research perspective, we've seen the holistic approach starting. So if we're going to improve technology, we need credible science that underpins that, that's evidence-based, and it's around female physiology and female anatomy. So I know there's people in this room that are doing work on the applied side with strength and conditioning coaches, and Chelsea was one of the first Super League clubs to really get involved in coach-specific female education across the board. But for us, we've got products in development and spin-out companies. So Maher Sports Bras spun out of Loughborough University. We've got Fuse, a hormone tracking device to track the menstrual cycle and understand the role of how the menstrual cycle could play in ACL injuries. So we're seeing technological solutions to evidence-based challenges, but we think the uniqueness of the female body to do with the hormone interaction, joint laxicity, the way we are all built differently, particularly in things like sports bras. We've still not had that longitudinal data which technology and AI will inform around when do you change your sports bra? How long does it give you support for? What does that mean in motion, in the running technique? So I think it's a bringing together of the science to inform the technology, but there's no doubt that the technological advancements will turbocharge how quickly we can get to some of those answers.
Yeah, so for us in eyeball, basically I would say the breakthrough is that we have so much video available, and out of that video we can generate data that can be used for a lot of purposes. Yeah, not only for the evaluation of players, but also for the coaches, for the players themselves, to see them growing. Individual player development is a big topic, and we are using that basically on very simple sports cameras, where we now can run algorithm on the videos. We created more than 10,000 data points per game, so you can imagine there is a lot of AI afterwards involved to interpret those data, and that is a major breakthrough that is now feasible, basically.
I think it's pretty obvious for us in the online abuse space. It's AI and sort of the monitoring of digital communities has been a real sort of development in this space. Generally going forward, for the female representation, there's a real need for us to have data sets and break down those barriers and support that growth, because inherently with a lot of AI, you do get biases in terms of the data sets. And so as part of the coalition, what we do with our academic partners, which Pfizer mentioned earlier, Dublin City University, is actually give them access to that information, unite the academics with the industry, and help develop that course, essentially.
Dublin City University is my old university, and I used to lecture there as well, so delighted to hear it. Speaking very specifically from a visual storytelling point of view around women and girls in sport, I think for the last 3 years, Jasmine, in terms of your question, it's really been down to seeing the increasing appetite by sports rights holders who come to us at Getty Images, who really want that chiseled, data-backed insights that specifically speaks to the impact of the visuals that they will create. We're also seeing huge appetite honestly around the world where, you know, we know that people of all genders want to close that visibility gap on sport. We know that any conference we go to, any conversation we have with the sports rights organisation in particular, it starts off with, how do I close the visibility gap in order to get the funding and then to move on through the programmes? And so research becomes all important. And it's interesting, I'm just back from MENA, so I'm very jet lagged like Erin on the panel, but I've been through Saudi Arabia, Bahrain and UAE, but we did a workshop in Bahrain with the Olympics Committee there, and it was very telling where a lot of government organisations are really speaking to us about the fact that media as a pillar and then visuals as a pillar has not always been as prominent in their plans. And what they're really looking for is to really get that data that highly goes into the demographics, that really looks at it from a national level, that cuts through across the generations. So if you think about the younger generations coming up where a lot of brands are sandboxing so much with generative AI, they want to understand where that value point is.
That's great, thank you. And Jo, I just want to come back to what you talked about. When you're doing this research, I think, what are the biggest differences we see between male and female athletes, and what are some interesting findings that's come out of that work?
Yeah, I think across sports science literature, we know that, you know, if you take the last 2 decades, there's a 94% gap in the male sample sizes and female sample sizes. We're trying to encourage our academics to shift their thinking so that we've got to think about female first. So we've got to design our research not to compare against the male, because our bodies are just so different. And to do that, we're taking a life course approach, because not only is every woman in this room designed completely differently, how you change over time is completely unique to you and at the stage that you're at. So we're looking at all stages of the female body and how that develops. We're looking at that through athletic career stages mapped onto it. And some of the biggest things around those hormonal changes, we're seeing post-pregnancy, perimenopause, postmenopause, and trying to really break that down on an individual basis, which is why it takes over 50 academics to do that. But I think one of the main things that we've recognised is in sports manufacturing, you know, if you look at IDA, they're developing football boots bespoke to female feet, and it is that approach from the feet up. The Q angle of the knee joint, how we decelerate from a strength and conditioning perspective, all of those factors come together. So I think the main difference between the male and the female body is the variability of the angles as well as the hormonal changes. And to then design studies that are holistic, we're having to bring in a biomechanist, a physiotherapist, a strength and conditioning coach. So it's taken a huge amount of work. But I think those are the kind of key things that we're seeing as a change. And there's some really exciting things emerging from our findings.
Great. Thank you. And Rebecca, just moving on to you, I think the report that only sports research, 6 to 8% is actually invested in women. And you talked about broadcast, which is obviously helping when it comes to revenue. But what do you think we need to do to change this? And I guess what else can women's sport that may not necessarily be broadcast, what they can be looking at to get that investment?
Well, I think just to answer your question, but also touch on something that Jo said. Jo's absolutely right with the research that's coming through. And I think for far too long, women were treated like little men, which clearly we are not. And the joy that we've got with, particularly with the awards aspect of what we do, is we have a global view about all the technologies and all the tech-led innovations, or science and engineering innovations that are coming through. And this was the first year. The awards have been running 13 years now. This was the first year we were able to put up a category and for it dedicated to innovation in women's sport, and it actually have sufficiently robust entries that we were able to take it from entry all the way through to ceremony, which is really shocking. And at the risk of being a bit doom and gloom, you know, the work that you cite, Jo, is absolutely great, but there's not nearly enough of it, nowhere near enough. And I mean, there are also some very big questions to be asked about, you know, if we take football, for example, we know that women's necks are 25 to 30% weaker than men's. And we know the issue in football about the dangers that we're seeing in male players heading the ball female players are playing with the same weight ball with We Connect. You know, there are issues like that I think that because the discussion, we're playing catch up to such a big degree, that there are important elements of the discussion that are being left behind, because we've got to chase so many hares to get equity and equality and fairness throughout sport. So, but the flip side is there's good work being done, and there's huge amount of scope. And I think for women to keep doing what they're doing, the one thing I would add, which is not necessarily tech-led, is when we talk about women's sport, we talk a lot about the players and the coaches, yet there are an awful lot of us who work in the business of sport, and there are an awful lot more of us who can work in the business of sport. And I think having women on all sides of the fence, I divide the sports sector into suits, tracksuits, tracksuits, lab coats and wallets. Those are broadly the 4 areas we all work in. And I think if we've got women represented in all those, then they kind of have a watching brief on each other, because if you've got women at all seats of all tables, we'll pick up on stuff. So to me, that's super important.
Are you, like you talked about your awards, have you seen any tech come through that has been specifically created for women, by women, without necessarily being something that was made for men and then adapted? Is that?
Yeah, we're seeing plenty of that. I mean, Joe, you've cited some. The Ada boots are obviously crucial. What's going on with sports bras is really exciting. Some of the concussion technologies that are coming through. And what's actually nice to see as well is that it used to be that we'd get technologies enter, and it would almost come with the caveat, can also be used for women. It's just, I think we can do better than that. Whereas now we're starting, it's not nearly enough yet. We know it's out there, but of course there's always an element of people protecting their secret source. But we're seeing it out there, and it's coming through more and more with more credibility and more robustness of the science and the engineering behind it.
Manfred, you touched on the 10,000 data points. When I was at Guild, I had the same thing. We built an AI tool around sim racing. And it's great because it makes the sport more objective rather than subjective. So do you want to talk a little bit about, building talent everywhere and creating that opportunity and how that applies to women versus men?
Yeah, basically, we treat women and men totally equally on our platform. There's no difference. So everything hangs in our world on video, and from that video we derive tagging data, and we derive physical data and physical metrics. That means from set pieces to tackles versus kilometers run, also speed, everything you can imagine. And that is for boys and girls, for women and men, totally equal. What is different, I think, is the interpretation afterwards. So, but that we are not offering. So that is basically up to the coaches, up to the interpreter at the end of the day. I think a big difference is that the girls' area is growing really fast. I mean, we started with boys, and now we have so many inquiries that girls want to come on our platform. And we should create clubs here, so that is totally different to the boys' part, and we are taking care about that because we believe in the women's space there can be still one platform that is covering the grassroots to basically the professional part, versus on the men's side there are already other incumbents that are doing the professional part, but that is a kind of not good solution, because then you don't see the whole world of talents. And in our case, one of our beauties, once you're on the platform, we follow you throughout your whole life. You have one profile, and whenever you are changing the club, whatever you're doing, you are staying with the whole profile on our platform. So we have a clear vision that we want to own this whole women's space from grassroots to the end, to the elite part. And secondly, or the last part, add that not, we see there's a much more need of communication on our platform when it comes to women. Why is that? There's not so much money in women football, and for example, there are no scouts. So we need to provide that service. So once we have women game on, we have to tell people, okay, who are the best talents? Where are the best talents? Yeah. So that is in the men part not that much, because you have a lot of scouts all the time looking at the data, and it's much easier. Yeah. So there is a big difference what we see.
And it was touched on the last panel that we see a lot of women stopping around the age of 16. Have you seen that in your data as well on the platform?
One more time, please.
I said it's like we discussed it in the last panel. We heard that a lot of women are stopping when they turn 16. But yeah, are you seeing that on your panel as well?
Yeah, we see that because there's basically no pathway to the professional area. We try to overcome that in a way that we offering different solutions. So we try to, for example, combine our talent with education and try to bring people, for example, into the US, where they combine their sport with university access. So this is one of our solutions that we implement in our platform, for example, grades and how they are doing in school, and provide this information then to universities in the US. So they see a pathway and education at the same time, and that hopefully will provide a better future for them.
Erin and Jacqueline, I might go over to you because I'm sure you've got something to add to this. I know just coming from an esports environment, 45% of gamers are women, 5% of professional esports women are 5% of professional esports are women, and only 2% of esports opportunities are for women. And a lot of it came down to online abuse and opportunities. So if I can hand over to you, it'd be great to hear from you on that.
Yeah, I think, so we know just online abuse impacts everyone, but disproportionately it impacts females and minority communities. And when we talk about online abuse, it's an umbrella term. So from hate speech, which is a legal offence, right the way to the sort of cyberbullying, digital hostility. So it's a very big space to work under. In the coalition, we see great differences between sports and the impact on women, if we can just focus on that lens at the moment. We do some great work with tennis, and I think Sarah touched on this earlier. You know, gambling is a big instigator for online abuse in tennis. In motorsport, it's females coming into a traditionally male space. And what you see with the impact on women is the different forms of abuse that they might receive. So quite sexual abuse is one of the things, but also sort of misogyny, and these values that people are bringing in digital spaces to these communities. We've done a lot of work with young girls in sport, and there was a survey recently, I think it was 2022, where 49% of young girls aged 11 to 21 fear sharing their views online. And what that leads to is actually a retraction from digital spaces. So it comes back to that idea of visibility in sport for females, and like we're saying, if you can see it, you can be it. But at the elite level, we spoke to an athlete not so long ago about their experience, and they had a spate of online abuse. It was a pile-on, it was a sort of standalone incident, but that had an impact on her for 10 years. And if you think about their careers, that might be the lifetime of them at their peak performance. And it's not just, you know, mental and physical impact, which I think we all can kind of assume, but also commercial impact as well. And so we talk about sort of female parity in sport. If elite athletes, or any athlete for that matter of fact, don't want to be in those digital spaces, then they're missing out on opportunities for sponsorship and commercialization. And that's a really big factor in the work that we do. So yeah, there's a lot to unpack, and we've worked quite heavily with esports, and the sort of esports and gaming community is very different. It brings its unique challenges in that sense. But I met with actually the Forza game, Microsoft, just 2 days ago in Seattle. And it was really interesting because they've cultivated a really strong digital community where people moderate between themselves on their platforms. And so that's a positive case study that it does exist, but it means people being in leadership positions, people, you know, addressing this issue head on to make that real lasting change.
Yeah, I mean, it's critical. If you don't know, I think 75% of females experience abuse when they're gaming, and it's usually of sexual or violent nature, turning one in 10 becomes suicidal. So it definitely does that impact. And Jacqueline, do you want to add to that?
Yeah, sure. I think it's quite poignant, hearing a lot of this, and it's difficult. When we go to, and I'll share just an insight I've had from being in the MENA region in the last couple of weeks. When we go to talk about that challenge around how do you build a pillar around visual storytelling as a sports rights organisation, one organisation shared with me, which is something we're beginning to see as a pattern, they haven't had a visibility pillar precisely because of the online abuse that their athletes are receiving, that they don't want to bring in visibility and they don't want to bring into a media pillar. And one of the ways in which we, I'll just confirm from Getty Images visual GPS perspective, well, from our research, we're seeing that females are telling us that the gender divide for them in sports started at a very young age, just in terms of the dropouts around puberty. Then number two, when we go to proactively bring collaborative voices around the table to show how with greater intentionality we look at closing that visibility gap, we bring together female athletes, we bring together female photographers. And in one of the workshops that I was running over the last couple of weeks, it's really difficult when you hear female athletes come into a room and they speak, it very cuts through the heart on they're challenged because they have to work. They're also trying to keep up with their training schedules. B, they're trying to be at the height of their athleticism on the pitch or where it may be. They're also going through a lot of surgery in the background. They also find that they don't always have the funding and the resources and the time to help them drive their brand sponsorships point of view. Then they're trying to understand, how do I push all of that in social media? So I do workshops on where are you getting your visual inspiration? Who are you looking up to? How are you trying to understand how you connect with your fan base? And they're doing all this work and then at the same time putting up with a lot of online abuse. So it is phenomenal to think about our female athletes today who are putting up with this and really trying to get to the end. Then you talk to the female photographers who are behind the lens, who are also really struggling within a very, a very gender-specific, traditionally space, and also trying to fight to get those visual representations right. So I think there's a huge amount of work that needs to be done, and obviously it always begins with collaboration, but there is a consistency and a commitment that's needed.
Yeah. I guess moving on to a positive is we are seeing more research go towards demonstrating women's skills when they're participating and playing rather than their looks. Are there any sports that are leading that way and any brands that are working with sports that are doing that as well?
Yeah, yeah, Jasmine, sorry, that's a good point. So what we see is that in all of our surveys that we do around the world, and we survey a minimum of 7,000 plus people in 25 markets, translated into 13 different languages. And one of the key questions we've been asking for the last 5+ years very consistently is around, how do you think that female athletes should be visually represented? And every time we ask this question, the points go up. So number one, as you just said there, Jasmine, people have an opinion. People of all genders want to see female athletes represented more for their athleticism and their skill rather than their beauty or their glamour in some senses. And it's an interesting point because you often see a lot of the younger generations or sports rights holders or athletes themselves trying to talk about the glamour, the lifestyle, around the sport. To engage with that in some of the social media influenced visual languages. But more specifically, just drawing it back in a little bit, sorry, Jasmine, the jet lag is getting to me now. But running back into it, I think it's actually really important that, yes, they have an opinion on it, but then it's so hard to find the space. So one of the brands that have been doing it really well, and I did speak about this last year at this event in WiMENA, but because I still think it's a very standout and class example, is when Belinda Moore was CEO of the Premier Women's Rugby League and did the rebrand campaign around Power Differently, which was really taken at its essence the traditional headshots that all team players often have to take as athletes, and really trying to do that in a completely different way that centered the female players' gaze immediately. So what that basically, really looked at was what was the data and insights that would drive that we could share with the female athletes themselves, who very much want to be ambassadors for their sport and connect with their audience base. So we have our women and girls in sport guidelines at Getty Images, which is really looking at safeguarding as well. Then B, it was bringing them in, and they all made the decision on the day without a shot list, but understanding that they were in control of the brief, that they could go into wardrobe, they could pick whatever they wanted, they could look at the different types of athletic poses that they wanted to go into. And again, it was interesting that every single one of them chose not to wear their uniform, their kit. And then it was about like really trying to understand how do you create a space where you can bring your authentic self that gives that more closer connection, and then bring that out and explode beyond traditional sports media. And I think that's an interesting piece when we're looking at this increasing landscape of sports fragmentation that actually can be quite positive in empowering the female athletes' gaze.
Thank you for that. I'm going to move on to AI because I think it's obviously very topical, especially when we talk about technology. And what I would love from the panel, but I will start with you, Jacqueline, is just, we hear so many negative stories, and it's going to take jobs, and in your space with creativity, it would actually be nice to hear about where you think AI is and where it's going for you. And I guess I personally think from a positive perspective, because I do think it can add a lot of value.
Yeah, so we very much have been looking at it from a research perspective, and we've been looking at how do you build trust in the age of AI through the power of visual storytelling, given the fact that we do have to mention that generative AI is on the rise when it comes to visual content creation. And so from that perspective, what we've been really looking at is understanding where, when, why, and how should you use generative AI as you go to market with intention. And we've been basing that on how consumers feel around the world when it comes to it. So I can absolutely confirm in our 30 years at Getty Images, we have never seen consumers come from such a place of deep mistrust when it comes to anything to do with visuals now. And it's really down to the fact that they cannot trust what they see anymore. So 76% will tell us, I don't know if the visual that I'm looking at, whether it's video or stills, is real or not. 87% are now telling us, I want a label on it. I just want to know if this is a generative AI piece or not. So we've been doing things like visual testing. So we'll take like real images shot by a human versus real images shot by a human. That's been through traditional photoshopping, for instance, versus CGI or 3D modeling versus generative AI by our own generative AI model at Getty Images. 70% of consumers can correctly identify a generative AI image. When we ask them, what are you looking for? They're looking for a lack of realism, perfection, fantasy. And then on the positive side, Jasmine, we are really seeing that, people are really excited about the creative possibilities that generative AI can bring. However, they do also want to ensure that authenticity is respected. So on that front, what I do say is, and I will be honest, because I'm a data researcher, I'd love to leave the point there and keep it really nice and clean and bite-sized, but the data is always controversial. So we equally see that over 70% are just as likely to get a real image shot by a human wrong. So the data is quite messy on that point. But ultimately, I do think it comes down to understanding. I'll give a very practical example. I have seen, and it's kind of raised the hair on the back of my neck, to be really honest, over the last 2 to 3 years, where I've got sports rights holders or corporate brand sponsors coming to us at Getty Images, either through their agencies, working with their agencies, or coming to us directly for advice. But they very much as we're moving towards the Paralympics, because they're finding it very difficult with budgets, time, investment, getting enough content around Paralympians and so on, they've been asking us, can we use generative AI models to actually create visual content around athletes around disability? And you're thinking, why? We've already got a huge visibility gap in this area. Cross over the intersectional lines around females, this is insane. So we will come back and we'll share a lot of our data insights on this is not the space to use that if you really want to build that trust. But ultimately, to your point, Jasmine, though, and especially when you think about esports and the kind of greater creative freedom there are different ways in which you can explode visual storytelling. And interestingly for me, it purely comes down to the younger generations in particular. So we think about Gen Zs and a little bit of the millennials, we're really seeing that over 64% of them are really excited about these new visual languages. That's an exciting lens in which to present women and girls in sport.
And Erin, are you using any digital tools, or have you seen any with AI, with the online abuse?
Yeah, it's I think generally across sport it's used quite heavily in that there's different providers and different approaches. The great thing about AI now is that it's able to detect sentiment in sort of comments and look at emojis. So we know a lot of abuse actually comes through the form of emojis with hidden meanings. And the sentiment and sort of sarcasm behind posts, AI is now actually able to identify that. So it's an incredible space to be in. I just wanted to touch upon this in that whilst there's AI, there's also this real need for education to sort of surround it with the topic of online abuse. And so what we do at UAOA is we have several educational modules designed for the industry to say, right, how do we define this? What are the tools? What are the legal and ethical implications? And the reason why that's so important with AI and sort of where we are with social media platforms is I think we all know how rapidly they change their policies. They're very influenced sort of by the geopolitics of what's going on in the world. And so what we try and do is really empower the end user. Because if you as an individual know your rights, your protection, your sort of country's framework, then that makes you more empowered and protected in those online spaces. So it's a really sort of tech needs to work with the education and the research, which we've heard about.
Great, thank you. And Manfred, how's AI working with you with 10,000 data points?
I think it's a totally different question from we just heard. We are developing our company totally AI-driven. That goes from programming to support, also for the players and the coaches. And the bigger projects are how to basically summarize searches. So when you come to a platform and you have 10,000 players in the female area, so how do you search? Yeah, and at the moment we search what is your age, are you playing, and so on. But that's not the future. The future is somebody. I want that type of player. So we have to create archetypes, and then we are searching the database based on that special feature of that archetype. And second one. Bigger topic is how can a player create out of his, when he has 40 games on the platform, soon a report from himself to send it out. Yeah? So that we call Gen AI. And then the Gen AI goes in and says, what were my best passes, what were my goals? And you have in, 10 minutes, you have a report of yourself that you can send out to coaches, to universities, whatever. So these are the real topics what we are working on now. And when we look a little bit further, the last topic is computer vision. How can you actually read? How can you read from a video everything you want to know? Now it's 80% automized, 20% still done by hand. But the future is, can I use AI to understand what's happening actually on the video? Because our eyes can actually do that. You can say, that's a good player, that's not a good player. So AI should, in theory, be able to do that as well, but there's still a long way to go. But we're on a good way, I think. The models are there. It just needs more time to implement, and we have, I don't know, we have so many data points to train all those models. So for us, that shouldn't be a problem in the future to get that done, I hope.
Yeah, so just to Jacqueline's point earlier, if you've got people that want photographs of Paralympic athletes, then they definitely need a day at Loughborough, and you'll get the most diverse, amazing athletes that would enjoy being in front of the camera. I can think of many that would look to do that. To follow on from what Manfred said, I think we know that the Holy Grail is the digital twin. So your physiology, your biomechanics as a AI generative model, and as the science advances, how you could, so think about cricket. If you're going to change a fast bowler's technique, if you've not changed that technique in relation to them, you could create an overuse injury in a different part of the body. So you could use AI to make adaptations on the physical field of play. But I think what keeps going missing in a lot of the conversations is that human insight element. So the role of the coach, there's a lot of our coaches, they're world-class coaches, but they don't really understand AI and what it means to them, and how could that inform those on-the-field decisions or those welfare decisions for an athlete. How do we make sure through coach education we're getting the coaches to shape what they want AI to be? So I think there's a huge role of the coach, and I think psychology. So the psychology of human behaviour. Sometimes the physical differences between us will dictate performance. Sometimes those physical margins are so small now that actually that will to win, that resilience, those psychological characteristics that are actually quite hard to quantify from an AI perspective. So for me, I think that the technology will turbocharge the information, but the human insight, the psychology, and the role of the coach will be the thing that, you know, creates that step change in competitive advantage for those that understand it and want to work with it.
Yeah, I think the thing with AI, I think it was Sarah said on an earlier panel, yeah, it's not all born equal. And I think it suddenly hit the sector like a ton of bricks where everybody's suddenly hearing AI. And with what we do, we probably see technologies about 3 to 7 years before they hit the zeitgeist. So, for example, the intelligent gum shields were introduced to rugby 2 years ago, won one of our awards about 7 years ago. So that's kind of like, so I first saw AI coming through in all the entries about 7 years ago, and I asked somebody about it. They were actually, the technology itself isn't that recent. And at that point, the advice was treat it like the office intern. Don't give it an important job. And for God's sake, don't let it talk to customers. Because those were in the days where you could actually program, you could interfere with chatbots and you could get it to write a haiku, doing all sorts. So, but I think over the years, if people have got smarter with it, one of the things that has become apparent, and almost to your point, Joe, is that there is an organisational change inherent with the use of AI. And I think you've got digital natives coming through who are probably called something else now, but they're very comfortable with it, and almost getting slightly out of control with their use of it. And I mean, I don't know, Jacqueline, you know more about this than I do, but some of the environmental points that we hear about use of particularly images with AI and the impact that's going to have on data centres in the not too distant future, AI in the wrong hands is incredibly environmentally friendly. And also, and it would be interesting to if anybody's got an opinion about this, please nab me afterwards. There's almost this, as I say, the organisational consideration, whereby you've got data and technology that are almost understood in silos within organisations, and in too many sports organisation, there's almost a slight ostrich approach at the top, usually in smaller teams or governing bodies. Naming no names, not suggesting that it's a universal problem at all, whereby this silo element is so considerable. And I would guess, Manfred, when you come in to sell your product, you've got some very sophisticated people who are potentially being blocked at different points in the organisation because not everybody's drunk the Kool-Aid on data and technology. And I think from, when we look at technology and research revolutionising women's sport, indeed all sport, while technology and research are confined to silos within organisations, the status quo is never going to change.
Yeah, I mean, when you talked earlier about the wallets coming into sport, I do think it is data and tech that is such a big part. And I think every organisation here, you need to be thinking about a data and tech strategy because it is critical. I'm going to open it up to questions now. I know everyone's been very patient this morning. It's been a great session and you might be hungry. So I think if there's any questions out there.
Hello, I'm Liv. I'm a production manager for a sports broadcast company. Rebecca, at the start you mentioned the importance of broadcasting sport. Absolutely something that I'm really passionate about, especially for grassroots and women's sports. It is something that we are breaking into as a sports broadcast company in grassroots in the UK. We do a lot of work in the MENA region, but women's sports and grassroots over in the MENA region is something that we're struggling to get the budget for, I guess. So I'm just interested to hear the panel's opinion on the current scope of broadcasting women's sports and grassroots sports and the future of that as well. And I guess any advice on breaking that area and allowing us to bring more attention to these sports through streaming and sports presentation in stadiums in order to enhance that engagement?
Yeah, well, it's an interesting space insofar as the commercial model that drives professional sport is changing, in that broadcast rights outside the super big sports are not what they were. And I think to pick up the financial, to make up the financial shortfall, professional sports certainly, and that trickles down obviously as you go through semi-pro. Don't know so much with grassroots, that's not really my wheelhouse. But making up those financial returns, you've got to get your sport in front of people, A, to give sponsors airtime, and B, to get participation. So I think they're two compelling elements to be selling as part of the broadcast package. But getting grassroots to clubs to part with cash is a perennial challenge, and I wish I had the answer for you, but on that one, I'm not your person. But I wish you the best of luck. And if there's anything more I can do, just connect with me on LinkedIn. If I think of anything, I'll let you know. But there are probably other people on this panel better placed to, or other people certainly within the conference better placed to answer that than me.
I think I'd just commend you for trying to shine a light on grassroots sports. I think at male or female levels, it's really, really challenging for the reasons Rebecca's eloquently touched on around that commerciality. We partnered with Vitality Health Insurance for our women's Lightning franchises to try and really help get a brand behind the research, to get a brand on the front of the netball dresses. We have different partners for our women's rugby setup, but we have pathways. So I think what we found helpful, particularly in netball, the Next Gen series that sits beneath the Super League, and you put those athletes on before the pro athletes come on, or the semi-pro athletes as the sport is developing. So how can you integrate grassroots as part of the entertainment element of professional sports? How can you get a spotlight? So even in some of our men's portfolio, we have an NFL academy of 16 to 19-year-olds, and the only way we can get eyes on that, which would still be perceived as grassroots level, is to try and map it onto the autumn games that happen down in London, to create noise around the advertising that happens in the pro side of that sport. So I think it's still a challenge, male or female, but finding ways to get those youth players and those grassroots players in and around those mega events and tentpole events would be really helpful.
Yeah, I would just add to that the brand conversation. It is like the women in sport is a real opportunity for brands that do come in, and so it might be a case of you even thinking about getting investment that goes into media and focusing on platforms like YouTube or TikTok where your audience is, and amplifying that way rather than just taking a fee for rights. There's been a lot of brands that have invested in that way. So, next question.
Thank you. I'm going to be looking down at my phone so I don't go on a ramble. But I'm Lauren. I'm the founder of a startup called Brown X Performance Lab, and it's very much an AI-powered sports lab and performance data ecosystem, and it's built to support athletes outside the elite system, so grassroots, young women, and especially from disadvantaged backgrounds as well. And we're in ideation phase, and the main idea is a smart training environment with like personalized data dashboards and a digital strength gym. And I say this as my background is I was homeless, and then I became a Team GB powerlifter, ranking second internationally. And I graduated Cambridge last year as the strongest ever woman in Oxford and Cambridge. As Oxford and Cambridge strongest ever woman lifter in history. So beyond tech, I understand that the issue is equity. And if we want to really diversify and make a sustainable talent pipeline in women's sport and across the UK, access to performance data shouldn't be reserved towards elite institutions, elite academies, just elite environments in general. But my question is on data democracy. So especially what you were saying, Rebecca, on the idea of women being seen as little men, how do we make sure that performance data isn't skewed towards men being the norm and men being the normative perfection that we're trying to achieve in our athletes? And the second question is, how does this non-normative data become a non-negotiable in the data landscape as a whole?
Great question, and Wow, you've just made me feel really inadequate. I think one of the things that we're starting to see as a trend is that people are democratizing data in the way that you say. I'm not sure necessarily in your sport, but I'm starting to see it a bit in football, because the line that we're hearing people take is, you can put the data out there, it's what you do with it. And I think this is one of the things we hear. Sorry, we've gone over. Am I okay to answer this? Yeah. One of the things is it's what you do with it. Data is meaningless unless you've got the smarts when it comes to interpreting it. So I think playing your part in promoting that message and being part of that trend, we're at the thin end of the wedge with it, for sure. But I think as people are getting more sophisticated in the space and understanding that it's not acceptable to put out a one-size-fits-all, particularly with data, one-size-fits-no-one. So I think it really is ensuring that data at source, where you can influence it, you do. I'm not suggesting it's easy, but I think you'd be kicking at more of an open door with it. And best of luck.
Thank you.
No worries, it's all right. Is there any more? I think we've got time for one more, so we'll go at the back.
My name's Faye. I'm from Sheffield Hallam University, studying sport development with coaching. And one of my real interests is like strength and conditioning training with 13 to 15-year-olds, looking at girls in particular. What kind of technology would you encourage within this age range to start adopting in their early career? Aim towards Joe or anybody.
So at that stage, I think it's back to, the basic principles that you'd be doing around your strength and conditioning, physiology. What we think there is a gap emerging at all academic institutions. How collectively do we bring together the IP to focus? And I know companies like the Well HQ are real kind of experts, with Dr. Emma Ross in this space as well, is how do we get the physiological and strength and conditioning principles right? So we're bespoking the education that all sports science undergrads go through, sports development undergrads go through, and there's probably a gap for some specialist provision at masters. So actually, I think the education bit's the answer in the first instance, and then the technology needs to follow, because similar to Rebecca, we see things very early. We see a lot of startups in this space start and fail because they didn't have the cloud experts. They needed £1 million of venture capitalist funding, but they only got angel funding. So actually we're seeing much more of a, the wallet challenge and the funding challenge for the data and the technology apps, as opposed to the people with the right ideas and the will to make it happen. So I think some of the apps need a little bit more development behind the scenes before we start to recommend for 13 and 15-year-old girls. I think go back to first principles of your science in the first instance, and the technology will start to... It's not the technology needs to catch up, it's the evidence-based technology and the money to help it catch up. It would be my answer.
Thank you. Will you join me thanking the panel for their time today?